I think we finished 16 last week, so we're looking at chapter 17 tonight. And I would just like to say that chapter 17 is probably one of the most difficult chapters in all of Book of Revelation. And the reason why is that, you need another one?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I got them right here. I just put them up here. Did everybody get one? Here you go. There you go. I think that's... Anyway, it's probably one of the most difficult chapters because there's a lot of symbolism and there's a lot of debate about the symbolism. And this begins, remember I told you in the beginning, there's 4 visions in Revelation. It's all one dream or vision that John saw, but this is the 3rd part of the vision. And as soon as I can find over here where my notes are, I'll tell you, because I don't have it in your notes, I have it in mine. But this 3rd vision is called, pages are sticking together here. I kept these notes all the way from seminary years ago. The 3rd vision is a picture of God's redemptive purpose. And all that means is that in the midst of evil, God is going to win. And he's going to save his people from evil. And I told y'all when we first started Revelation, apocalyptic translates revelation. They're the same words. One's Greek and one's English. It means revealing something that's hidden. That's all revelation is. And notice it's not plural. Revelation with 4 visions. And in this 3rd vision, we're going to see God actually confronting evil head on. And he's going to be victorious. And I know if you were in persecution and it looked like there was no end to your struggles, like some of our Christians around the world, to know that you read the back of the book and we win is a consoling factor. And so that's the reason why the book of Revelation is in our Bible. God wanted us to have hope even when there appears to be no hope. And I know right now, if you're like me, and I know you are, you're frustrated with the way things are going in our government. You're very frustrated with the evil that's paraded across our screens and our streets and our schools, and things like that. And you feel helpless. You feel like there's no hope. I'm happy to say from things I'm reading, and there's a surge of conservative pushback that is beginning to happen. The trouble is we don't have control of the media. The media is always controlled by the bad guys, and it really is. It's been purchased and bought through the years. They actually control it. So they can spin out what they want you to hear and your children to hear in the schools, and it's almost like we're captive to that. But I got good news for you that it hasn't affected God. He's still in control. And if the world grows progressively worse, which includes America, we still can realize that in the end, God wins. And we're a part of that winning team. In this world, Jesus said you'd have tribulation. In John chapter 16, he said, but fear not, for I have overcome this world. And so I just wanted to encourage you tonight that as we finish out Revelation here in the next couple of weeks, we'll be seeing God's redemptive work in the midst of an evil world. And redemptive means purchasing people by the blood of Jesus so that we can be born again. So having said that as an introduction, let's get started. The mystery of Babylon, verses 1 through 18. He says, verse 1, one of the 7 angels who had 7 bowls came and said to me, come, and I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits on many waters. Now, harlotry symbolizes opposition to God. And there's several Old Testament references I've used before. But one of the things that we see from the prophets is that they pictured Israel as being God's bride. And the church is God's bride. And when God's people or the church today start falling in love with the world, is as if we have left our bridegroom for a harlot or a prostitute. We're being unfaithful, spiritually speaking. And the Bible uses that language because people can understand that. Because in marriage, you're to be faithful unto death, to one partner. But in a spiritual sense, this terminology is used, as it was in the book of Hosea and other passages, to symbolize that we're God's, bride. He's the bridegroom. And when we chase after things in this world, is as if we are committing adultery, spiritual adultery against God. And so that's the kind of the figurative understanding of this passage here. It says, in the Old Testament, the metaphor of adultery was frequently used of Israel as God's faithless wife who had proved unfaithful by turning to false gods. Verse number 2, with her the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. Now, the scripture doesn't tell us what power is considered to be the prostitute, spiritual prostitute, okay? Some scholars believe it's the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church, through history, has been involved in making and breaking kings, has been involved in some pretty sadistic stuff, has killed millions of Christians, I'm talking about Protestants. And there are some pretty strong scholars who still believe that that's going to be a part of the end times, and that, the woman symbolizes the Catholic Church, who's in line with the beast that she's riding, and she's actually pulling the strings. Now, that's not me. That's certain scholars. Now, there's a book called A Woman Rides the Beast by T.W. Hunt, if you're interested in looking this up. And it's an excellent history book, and it's Catholic history. It's not something somebody made up. And he goes back in that book and profiles the popes. And, they had 3 popes at one time, and the anti-popes, and the corruption that was in the church itself. And their political agendas of making and breaking kingdoms through the ages. You see, somewhere back in around the 3rd to 4th century, when the Catholic Church was just getting started, they got off track. The original intent of the church was to win the lost to Jesus Christ. But in 325, when the Emperor Constantine became emperor, he took the Christian church and he took the government and he essentially put them together. So that the emperor, which was Constantine, was the head of the church here, okay? So now guess what came into play? Money. And it was set up so that if you want to become a bishop, or if you want to become a priest, or anything like that, you actually were paid, but you had to pay the money to get that position. Now, once you got that position, say you had a church over here where you were a bishop over a certain area, then the parishioners paid you money. You have to send money back to this organization known as the Catholic Church, but you could keep the rest. So they would inflate the taxes or the fees to the church, and then they would sell pennants and things like that, and you would be involved in a money scheme that would support the government church. When we get to the 15th century and we have the Protestant Reformation, that's when people got fed up with it, kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater, and started the Protestant movement. That's what we're part of. And we got back, Protestants went back to the Bible. And so that's how we got started, as Baptists and Methodists and everything else. But my point is that the history of the Catholic Church points out the fact that they have influenced the world with a lot of false teaching about God. And people who have aligned themselves. And there's some solid preachers through the ages that have preached series from their pulpits saying that, that's what they do. Now, I really believe there's some bona fide Christians within the Catholic Church. I believe they've read their Bible, but then they caught up in tradition. They don't know how to leave the church, because they feel very uncomfortable. It's a difficult thing to be a Catholic and become a non-Catholic, and because I've witnessed to them, I've talked to them. And it's very difficult. And I think, Deborah has shared with us a little bit of her experience, and she came from Catholicism. And there's probably some genuine Christians within that church. But the Catholic Church, their agenda is behind the scenes kingdom making and kingdom breaking. So some people see the woman riding the beast is the religious Antichrist, which is, for them, it's the Catholic Church. Now, I don't go as far to say that because I have no definitive answer. It looks like that, but there's no clear thing from God's word to say it is that. But it kind of fits, like, when O.J. Simpson, remember, got up, the guy said, put the glove on, and it didn't fit, and what did he say? If it don't fit, you got to acquit, has a bunch of lies and that stuff, but that's another story. But it says here, with her, the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. Now, and Deborah can vouch for that, I'm not putting her on the spot, but in the Catholic Church, they have a lot of idols, a lot of icons, a lot of their worship. For example, during Easter, they have the 12 stations of the cross. And these are supposed to be 12 events from the Bible where you actually go through and pray. They've got the rosary beads that you pray to Mother Mary. And they've got a lot of stuff that when you look at it and you read the 10 Commandments, no other gods before me and no graven images, and you walk into a Catholic cathedral, you're going, whoa, what's up with this? And there's symbolism behind all of that. So having said that, they have impacted the entire world. I think there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 billion or close to 2 billion Catholics in the world. Most of them are in South America and in South Korea now. But there are a lot of Protestants too. But altogether, between Catholics and Protestants, about 2.5 billion people in the world are Christians, because they count Catholics as being Christians. That being said, the Catholic Church has influenced umpteenth thousands of kingdoms, reformations and governments, working behind the scene. They have a group of priests called the Jesuits, and the Jesuits are called the Society of Jesus. And if you read their history, when they were first formed, their goal was to win the lost to Jesus Christ. That was their agenda. Problem is, when they got started hundreds of years ago, they forced people to become Christians, and they would actually plot and knock off certain rulers and stuff in countries so they could become more Catholic. So when you read that history, I used to teach church history, and when I read it and studied, I said, nobody ever told me this, So when I taught church history, I would teach it just like it's written. And I had this one young lady in one of my classes down in Charleston at Limestone College. When the class was over, she said, I don't like the way you teach this class. And I said, why? She said, it sounds like you're against Catholics. And she said, I'm a Catholic. And I said, well, I'm sorry you feel that way, but this is from your books, from your history of what happened. I can't change history. She said, well, I've never heard this. I said, you won't, that's why you come to college, to become open-minded to what actually exists in the world, to find truth. So I just want to give you a little introduction, because some people think that it's her. Others think it's the beginning of a new government, a new religious order that's bigger than, the Catholic Church, okay? The wine symbolizes a form of seduction. So that's symbolic for, through her teachings or through this church, religious organization, their teaching and stuff actually seduce people to move away from God and to follow their teachings, okay? Verse number 3, then the angel carried me away in the spirit into a desert, and there I saw the woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. Now, that's kind of a grotesque picture if you can try to imagine it. The beast that is mentioned here is the same one that we looked at in Revelation 13:1, the Antichrist. The woman on the beast represents her linkage to the beast. If you remember, there was a religious Antichrist and then, of course, political Antichrist. So some people think that with the woman on the beast, riding the beast, that she's actually supporting what the beast is doing, because I told you religion is a part of all of our lives and the entire world. And if you don't, if people mess with your religion, you can get in wars over that. The way God created us, because we're spiritual beings, we're going to worship someone or something. That's just our nature. And when people say they're atheists, what they're basically saying is they're God. They're their own God. But we're spiritually attuned to following something in some religion. And, having said that, in the end times, just like now, people will follow sometimes teachings that are so far off base, and it just makes you wonder, are they that dumb or are they that, crazy? If you ever get into study, and I may do this, if I'm here long enough as a pastor, a series on what the Mormons believe and what Jehovah's Witnesses believe. They're trying to gradually fit into the mainstream Christianity. Mormons have really pushed themselves into that position. They call themselves the Church of the Latter-day Saints of Jesus Christ. And when they come to your door, they bring a King James Bible and they bring the Book of Mormon. And if you talk with them, they sound like, but they're not. And we're moving into a time where a lot of people want some religious involvement, but there's so many new teachings out there that are contrary to the Bible. So I submit to you, this is your guidebook. This is your truth. And don't listen to any other, falsehood. Scarlet, dressed in scarlet, is an intimate relationship to Satan. That's what the color symbolizes. 7 heads represents the fullness of power. Some people think that it's 7 governments. And then the 10 horns are 10 rulers or kings. So these are just symbols that this person is able in these end times to have influence over a united kingdom, most likely ancient Rome, which would include France, Germany, England, some of the other countries that are part of the Roman Empire. Because in Rome, and any of y'all been to Rome? I've never been. I understand there's 7 hills in the city of Rome. And of course, they had temples built on those hills. So when it talks about the 7 hills, many people believe that the Antichrist will have his power centralized in Rome. And they think that that's where the central power will be. Other people seem to think there'll be united Europe, which we've already seen that. Now it's kind of just rambling a little bit. But it could be that. We just don't know. All we know is the Bible's telling us there's going to be some type of united government over in that part of the world that can be connected back to the old Roman Empire. And the influence in the world will be to rule the world, and the Antichrist will use that political power. And then the one riding the beast will use religious power to influence people to worship the beast. Everybody with me? Okay. All right, let's go on. Verse number 4. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. So just looking at that word, that tells me this is not going to be someone who, and this is the whole world power that's coming, is not going to be something that's unpleasant. It's going to be something that appeals to the human sinful nature. It's going to affect many people in the world. Money's involved, of course. The wealth and luxuries and things like that are mentioned here. The gold cup is filled with corruption, and the woman entices men away from God. And men is a generic term for men and women. Of course, here lately, we don't know the difference between a man and a woman. According to some of our political leaders, that's pretty stupid stuff in my opinion. But in either case, she influences people to fall away from the truth. Now, in one of Paul's letters, he said in the end times, there'll be a great delusion come over the earth. A delusion is, in simple terms, some type of defective teaching that causes people to quit believing what they've always believed and to believe what they're saying is the truth. Some people, when they talk about it, say we're in the midst of seeing that happen now because so many so-called churches are no longer really preaching the Bible. Now, most of the churches I'm associated with, by preachers I know and things like that, they're still preaching the Bible. But there are a lot of churches and denominations that are watering down the gospel, ordaining homosexuals, having, things where they have no difference between men and women. They teach that. There was a group in Colombia way back in 1998. I was there, and there was one of the pastors stood up and prayed to God as a woman. And no one said anything about that except little old Bob. And it was me versus them, you might say. But nonetheless, I see it happening ever so slowly. And then when you talk with some young people that have been off to college and you talk with them, and most of them were raised in college, the stuff they're hearing at college from their philosophy professors and even religious professors is so different than what we know about God's Word, and is so polluted with lies and deception and without no proof. The college students I talk with, when we get in a debate about, the truth, I asked them to produce evidence. Well, Dr. So-and-so said. I said, well, that's a human being. Human beings have been proven to have error, I says, this is your guideline. Well, that's just a piece of literature that was written through the centuries by a bunch of old men, and we can't believe that. And I said, well, suppose I told you that historically that the Word of God has been searched and researched and challenged, and we have archaeological evidence to show that these scriptures existed as far back as 400 BC. They haven't changed. New Testament came along around 200 and something AD. And I said, and we have manuscripts over 24,000 that date back to that time period. Nothing's changed. I said, and when you read these guys, they have actual predictions of what's going to happen 800 to 1,000 years later, and those events have already happened exactly the way they were. And the one I like to use is Jesus was born in the city of Bethlehem. Micah chapter 5 verse 2 says the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. He lived around 800, 850 BC. And he's already telling us, and when Jesus was born, he was born in a manger in Bethlehem, the city of David. And I start throwing that back at him. I said, now prove to me what that professor told you is truth. I have no answers. They go into those schools unprepared because we don't, and I'm going to put myself in this category, we don't do a very good job raising our kids anymore with the truth. They can be easily twisted. I commend those who are able to keep their kids at home and homeschool. I commend those who are able to, send their kids to a private church school. That's great. But not every family can do that, So where does the responsibility lies? It lies with mom and dad and the preacher. And, bringing them to church, make sure they're in a Bible-believing church to hear the truth. And then having a preacher that can explain to them when they are challenged in their faith, the differences. And because of that, and I didn't mean to get off track, but it's so important because when you come back to the Bible and you read the book of Revelation, almost everybody I've ever heard say, I just want to study the book of Revelation. My question is, why? Well, I want to find out when the end's coming. I said, well, it's not in there. God doesn't tell us when he's coming. What's in there is some of the events. Well, I just want to know what these beasts are and all this other stuff. One of them called them beastes. And I said, no, it's beast. It's not beastes. And I get tickled at people because they want to know so much, but they're not willing to put forth the effort to learn. And that's where I think we fail. So she is the one who symbolically represents a religious order that influences the political world, governments, to turn away from the truth and idolatry and whatever you want to call it. Verse 5, the title was written on her forehead, Mystery Babylon, that's supposed to be a Y in there, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. This is not the first time we see a name written on the forehead. The saints were sealed on their foreheads. There was a custom among Romans for harlots to wear a headband bearing the name of the owner. So you would know who the harlots were in the street by what the headdress was. What's the color usually associated with harlotry? Red. They call it in the big cities, they call it red light district. I know when I was going to seminary at Fort Worth, they said that there was a certain section in Fort Worth that for a long time was nothing but bars and, well, going back to the cowboy days, saloons and bars and, they call them cat houses and things like that. And they called it the red light district. And that color is associated with that. Where do you think that came from? Think about it. What happened in the Old Testament when Jericho fell? Who was the lady that rescued the spies from Israel? Do you remember her name? What did they tell her? Yeah, all she had in her facility was mostly red, and they told her to put a red scarf in the window. When the city comes down, we won't mess with you. Well, that was a symbol of the blood of Christ. And it's interesting because she shows up in the family tree of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1, Rahab, the harlot. So God can save anybody, okay? But she was changed from, because she was faith, but she had a red scarf. That's all she had, put it in there. But as we look back to that red scarf also symbolizes the blood of Jesus Christ and salvation. So symbolism can be used in multiple ways, but here it's talking about that. And it said on her forehead, just like they would mark the prostitutes then, Mystery Babylon the Great. Now, the name Babylon, and I'm going to have to get me some fresh markers. I think these are starting to dry up on me a little bit. But the name Babylon refers to, if this is Israel here, the area toward the east, today is known as Iraq, and parts of Iran, but primarily Iraq. And back then, the empire that existed was Babylon, and they had some of the, how can I say, ancient wonders of the ancient world. This was a very powerful empire. And if you remember in our Bible, the Babylonians came over and God allowed them to come in this way, take Jerusalem, tear down the temple, and carry him back into captivity. After they kept him there for about 70 years, the Persians took over. And the Persians, when they took over, of course, they absorbed the Assyrians up here and some of these other countries. And they allowed, in the book of Nehemiah and Ezra, for Israel to come back and reoccupy. The trouble was, the 10 tribes to the north are missing, and only 2 tribes in the south were remnants. One of those tribes was Judah, and that's where Jesus comes from. Everybody following me? Well, because Babylon had such a negative influence and was not only punishing Israel, and some of the prophets couldn't understand, God, how can you allow somebody more wicked than Israel to come in and punish us? Well, this is his world. And if his children aren't behaving, and he wants to take the devil's crowd and whoop up on them and break them down, and that actually happened. And, he told the prophets, we're at the mercy of the Lord. And he permitted it to happen. But at the same time, God says, I will bring severe judgment against Babylon. But symbolically in our Bible, Babylon is also a reference at that time of the Roman Empire. And it was a code name. So when you see Babylon, you can think Roman. Rome, of course, was situated over here. And during the days of Jesus, they were in power. And some of the same things that Babylon had done to God's people, the Romans were doing to God's people when Jesus was here. They controlled everything. So that being said, today, because the Roman Empire is essentially dead, it really is a picture of Western civilization. Because if you think about it, we come from the Greeks and the Romans. That's where we get our laws and our beliefs and stuff. And of course, Christianity is a part of our culture. And, Christianity is being perverted. And so the Babylon of today, or in the end times, is probably going to be the Western civilization, or what we're part of. And that being said, we come from the Greeks and the Romans, and a distortion of the truth in Christianity, and this whole civilization pulling away from God is actually going to cause people to rebel against God, and God says he's going to bring judgment. So there's some preachers who think that Babylon represents the United States and represents Europe, and that we come after them, but we still have at our root of who we are, the culture of these people. Now let me pause, see if you got any questions, because I don't want to go too fast. Any questions so far? Am I keeping it simple enough for you? Okay. So the mystery of Babylon is essentially saying the great mother of prostitutes, there's still something hidden that we don't know. So all of this could completely change. If the Lord tarries for another 1,000 years, which he could, this might change so this whole culture is back over in Europe. And you see, their predecessors to us, we came from the Europeans, so everything that happened over there from the Romans and Greeks just moved west, and we're a part of that. So that being said, I read a book not too long ago, about a year ago, I came across it, and this preacher really made a good argument that Babylon represented America, and that we're polluting the world now through our wealth and our influence. And the more he went on, the more I said, whoa, I never thought about it the way you're presenting it. In the midst of Babylon is a remnant of Christians, and that would represent the true Christians church. But it said that the culture is gradually turning against religion in America, and Europe has already essentially become de-Christianized. And they're saying it's a post-Christian era in our country today, that Western civilization is essentially already dead, and the influence of Christianity is on the way down. In the place of Christianity, there has to be a religion. Remember, I told you that. So it will have a form, as Paul said, a form of godliness, but it will deny the power thereof. And that power, of course, is Jesus Christ. So when you start seeing these religious organizations pop up and hear what they're teaching, he very well may have hit it on the head, But God says he will come against Babylon, later on we'll see, and bring judgment against her because of the abominations. It says the name mystery can be interpreted as a part of the name, or it is an indication that the true identity of the city of harlotry is hidden to a later time. Mother of prostitutes shows that she influences others to do the evil that she is doing. Now in verse 6, I saw the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. This is an ancient idiom. If you know what an idiom is, it's an expression that is symbolic of something else. And, people who are drunk with blood is a symbol of someone who kills a lot. Okay? And it says to indicate a large number of deaths due to persecution. So this new religious order, and they will refer to themselves, I'm sure, as a church or religion, will kill Christians. Now, just to show you that people said this thing couldn't happen in modern times. Well, during World War II, it's exactly what Hitler did. See, a lot of people don't know this. Hitler, before he came into power through his socialistic agendas in his party, was already quietly, as he gained power, removing bona fide Christian ministers from the country. He gave them a choice: either follow me and support my regime, or you'd be silenced. Many of them were jailed. Hundreds upon hundreds, even into the thousands, were killed. And those that did escape, like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he was one who did escape, but he went back, and he was killed 2 weeks before Hitler in Germany fell. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. You ought to watch that movie. It's on, I don't know if it's on Amazon or one of them. The book, yeah. I read the book first, and after I read the book, I said, I got to see the movie. So I watched the movie, and of course I read the books like this. Very devoted Christian. And anyway, he went back to try to, and Hitler accused him of being in a plot to get rid of Hitler, and because his brother and some others were involved in that plot, and because he was connected with him. And for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing. And there were 42 known attempts on Hitler's life, and they all failed. But I wonder sometimes, maybe if people took an earlier, how many millions of people would have lived, but that's another story. But what he did was he created a government religion. He mixed the Catholic faith with it because he was raised Catholic. And then in his regime, with all his generals and stuff, many of them was dealing in the occult. In other words, they believed in ancient legends about Germany and their gods and Thor and all this stuff. They also, some of them believed in Satanism and things like that. Well, they were influencing some of the decisions at the higher levels. And so when he formed this religion, if you looked at it on the surface, they took over churches. So if you went in there, the only difference you'd notice immediately would be there would be a swastika flag hanging over the Lord's Supper table. Hitler actually has a picture of himself holding a Bible in front of the communion table with a swastika, saying he's supporting religion. And at the same time, he was killing preachers and purging the nation. And if you went along with him, he didn't bother you. But if you didn't go along with him, and he had spies come into your church, like, if I'm preaching the gospel, you'd come in, and if they heard me say anything against Hitler or against his regime, then I was marked. And then in the middle of the night, and Gail and I watched a documentary one day, and this older lady was sitting there, and they were interviewing him. And the interviewer said, tell us what happened in your neighborhood. She said, well, in the middle of the night, my neighbor, I heard a bunch of commotion. I got up. I looked out the window, and she said there was a bunch of government vehicles across the street, and they were dragging my neighbor out of the house. And she said, well, what happened? She said, we never saw him again. And she said, that just hadn't happened to one of my friends. It happened to a lot. She said, if you were against Hitler and someone told on you, what does it say? If you see something, say something. You heard that? That's what they were basically saying. And so terrorism, and many people were dragged out of their beds. And so someone like me, preaching the truth, I would not be standing here today if I lived in that time. He got rid of them. Because he knew the influence of religion. So he provided religion. So it's been done. It's already been done. It's done in the world today. Putin, everybody sees him as a communist and stuff. He claims he's an Orthodox, Greek Orthodox Christian. He goes to communion and things like that. So I'm just telling you, and there are millions of people that all they get is the TV version of these people. And Hitler, and they asked that woman that, I remember this when Gail was watching, they said, well, and she started crying. She said, how could you not say something and do something? She said, Hitler gave us jobs. Hitler restored our economy. When things were bad, he made us proud again to be Germans. So we thought he was the best thing since, sliced bread, as they say. And so when people get desperate, they look for someone to deliver them. Yes?
Speak to the absence of baby formula.
Oh, you're talking about baby formula? I don't know if that's got anything with this, but I think it's stupidity. I think the government just failed on that. I mean, they enjoy killing babies anyway, so what's the few starving babies in their book,
Kind of go inside with the abortion, and then here we go. We don't have formula to feed the babies.
So we need to get rid of the babies. I hadn't heard them say that yet, but they're probably talking it. It'll probably come out soon. But all I'm saying is this has already happened in history. And that's probably the most current thing that you can associate it with. Killing Christians. Last statistic I heard, and this was been 10 years ago, they were reported over 50,000 Christians we know of that have been put to death in 1 year simply because of their faith. We don't know how many behind the Iron Curtain in China because we don't get reports. And the church in China is really, really larger than the church in America, but it's underground. But governments and religions that are anti-Christian, they kill them in a minute. This is a reference to that. Then the angel said to me in verse 7, why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and the beast she rides, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. You see, the mystery of the beast and the harlot are the same. The beast which you saw once was, now is not, and will come up out of the abyss, which is a reference to hell, and go to his destruction. The inhabitants of the earth whose names have not been written in the book of life, and that's us, name written down in the book of life, from the creation of the world will be astonished when they see the beast, because he once was, now is not, and yet will come. Now here's an explanation. It says the beast is to pass through 3 stages. It was. In other words, it had an existence in the past. Most people believe this is a reference to the Romans because they rule with an iron fist. It is not. There'll be a time when it does not exist. The Roman Empire fell somewhere around 490 A.D. The eastern part of the Roman Empire fell in 1453 when the Turks took over Constantinople. So essentially, since the 15th century, the old Roman Empire is no longer existing. It is to ascend from the bottomless pit. It will have a future manifestation, which will be the incarnation of satanic evil. So somewhere down the road, the old way of doing government, the old way of doing religion, the system that has been against God will resurface in a large worldwide scale. So Western civilization has been led by Christianity and has basically evangelized the world. Think about it. Our forefathers who came to these shores, over 40,000 of them were locked up for their faith in England and other places. They put them on boats, came over here. They worked off their servitude and established cities. And so our nation from the beginning was a Christian nation, though it doesn't look like much of it now. But that has begun to change. And since we have such a great influence, along with the Europeans, who's to say what the church will look like in the future? But I can already see it changing. The church has become very liberal, the church we know, except in pockets like ours, where there's a few preachers who still believe the Bible to be the true word of God and unashamedly preach the truth and salvation only by the blood of Jesus Christ. I mean, that's foundational. But some circles, they don't see that. And then it says here, it will come back. So it once existed, it does not exist, and it comes back. And that's a reference to that. All right, let's go to the next verse. Well, let me finish reading a note. The 3 stages of the existence of the beast are to be identified with the 7 heads. He once existed in one or more of his heads. He ceased to exist when one of his heads received a mortal wound, but he will have a future existence when the head is healed. The healing of the head will involve a satanic embodiment that will exceed anything that has ever occurred. In other words, there's coming a day when this Antichrist will almost, you'd think he came back to life, but he'll be completely controlled by Satan. Be like Satan as a human being. Or should I say a human being controlled by Satan. And then in verse 9, John stops and says, this calls for a mind of wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits, which is a reference to Rome. It could represent the rulers in Rome, which has 7 hills. This is only speculation. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen. 1 is, the other has not yet come. But when he does come, he must remain for a little while. Some people think that the 5 kings fall and 1 is Rome. The seventh one is to come, and the 8th one is going to be the Antichrist, and that's the next one in line. So here's 3 possibilities, and you don't have to remember this for a test. When I taught it in college, you had to, but you don't have to worry about this. It says the kingdoms could represent the Caesars. To take the approach you have to distort history a little bit to make it work. Now let me pause and say to you, when it comes to Bible prophecy, when it comes to Christians studying Bible prophecy, there's a real danger, because we don't have all the answers, to take the liberty to, give your personal opinion and to fit, you've heard the expression, fit a square peg into a round hole, And when it comes to history, there have been a lot of Christian scholars, when it comes to prophecy, who've tried to go back in timeline and say, well, the book of Revelation, has a lot of information symbolic, and they try to plug it into certain points in history. And some people see that history is divided up into 7 time periods. I don't know if you've ever heard, and I've taught it before when we first started this months ago, dispensationalism, which means God has worked in human history in 7 dispensations or 7 periods of time. And the last one, they say, is the church age. Well, if that be the truth, then ever since the church was started up until today, we're stuck in the 7th period of time, which is when the book of Revelation is going to happen somewhere out in the future. That being said, there have been kings and kingdoms, and, for example, I think I got them listed here. And number 2, you had Egypt, you had Assyria, you had, let's see, what's the other one? Babylon. I'll just do the shirt. Persia, right? And then you had the Greeks. And then you've had, of course, the Romans. So you've had different kingdoms. So some people fit them in and say, here we are at the end of time, and we don't know what this new government will be, this world power, but it'd be kind of a combination of some of these that pre-existed. Okay, it's one way of looking at it. The other thing is, if you look at the dates, these Caesars, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And there's actually 2 more that are not listed there. The 12 Caesars. And the 12 Caesars that existed in the first 150 years of Rome, well, really 100 years or so, they punished Christians a lot. In fact, if you read their histories, and if you like to read, there's a book called The 12 Caesars. And it's a very interesting book. I will caution you, these Caesars were not choir boys. They were homosexuals. They made transgenders look like Santa Claus. They killed family members. They committed all kinds of sexual perversity. Yet they were the rulers of the world, and they were to be referred to as Lord. And that's what got a lot of Christians in trouble, because they wouldn't call him Lord. They said there's only one Lord, who's Jesus. But according to the Roman Empire, they had reached a point of deity. So you had to worship the emperor. Emperor worship was a big thing, and these were the guys that you worshiped. They changed power through assassination, changed power through manipulation. Many of them were unable to have children, so they would adopt nephews or whatever to take their places. If you saw the movie The Gladiator, how many of y'all saw that movie? Pretty graphic picture. That's a true history, by the way. It's just put in a novel form. But anyway, what I wanted to tell you was that these kingdoms that are mentioned here could have been those Caesars, a reference to them. We don't know. But number 3 is probably the best answer. These are the most likely kingdoms, but the exact identity is not known with certainty. for someone to come along and insert these kingdoms or to insert these Caesars in here is purely speculation. I've made it a point in all my teaching when it comes to the book of Revelation not to get caught up in speculation. I could sell books. I could make videos. And people say, well, that's what Dr. Bob said. Well, I got news for you. Dr. Bob don't feel comfortable with telling you something I don't know anything about. I can just look at what others have said, and even they are skeptical. Is that pretty clear? Verse 11, the beast who once was and now is not is the eighth king. He belongs to the seven and is going to his destruction. The eighth kingdom is full of embodiment of Satan and will end in total destruction. Remember, I told you Christ will be victorious. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings along with the beasts. Some of these 10 kings as the 10 nations of the European Commonwealth, as a revived Roman Empire. And we have that in existence right now. If you've seen the European nations, their currency is a euro. And they formed, I don't know how many, 15, 20 years ago. And they are working together for their economic security and defense. Now Finland is joining them, joining NATO, and so is Sweden, which should make you perk up a little bit. They're becoming united, and Russia's forcing the issue. It says here, they have one purpose and will give their power and authority to the beast. They are allies to the beast. And the beast is a reference to the Antichrist. They will make war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will overcome them because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. So these kings or kingdoms will be major contributors to the power used against God and his followers. Verse 15, then the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits, on the beast in the water, are peoples and multitudes, nations and languages. So the picture is she's riding the beast, and I'll just use an X. She's riding the beast, and I just use a block, and there's water that the beast is standing in. And the water down here is symbolic of the masses of people in the earth. So these two powers, are going to rule the world. And you said, what would cause people to submit to this? You tell me. You got any suggestions? What would make the world turn to someone like this? What do you think would have to happen? Hunger.
Wiser and weaker.
Health scare. Y'all starting to see it now. See, and we're in the 101 level. When you go to college, your first year they call the courses 100 level courses. Second year is 200. Of course, third and fourth year is 300 and 400 level courses. As you move up the scale in college, the courses get more intense and more specific to what you're going to specialize or major in. Excuse me, and what you're seeing now, because see, I told y'all a few weeks ago when we were studying one of these chapters on the mark of the beast, I always said to myself personally, I don't see people falling for this. There's no way they'd be pushed into this, and to identify with the government and to have them have control over you. And then before I could get the words out of my mouth, in less than 10 years, we've been forced into giving up our identity. And they tell us they're going to protect our identity from other sources, but they have our identity. They know where we go. They gave us the phones that we got addicted to. The facial recognition, the retina can be identified. It's funny because the mark's going to be on the head and on the hand, and they tell us they can put chips in us. All that's here. It's been here. And then they give us if you look at your driver's license, they started changing them, and our governor fought it. Our governor fought it at the time. Who was our governor? I can't remember. The Attorney General fought it, and then finally the federal government said, you either do this or we're going to take away your funding. And so they gave into it. But you've got, on the front of it, of course, that's a beautiful picture of myself. Looks like a criminal. But on the back, you got these barcodes, and then here, all this stuff in here, I've been told, has everything they know about me that's in public records. And this is linked to my concealed weapon permit. So when the cop pulls me over, or the policeman pulls me over, if I don't show him this, he already knows that I have this, and so he's pretty much guessing I have a gun on board. And they told us in CWP, make sure to carry both of these with you, and when you're pulled over, show them both of them. And then let them know you don't have a weapon or you do have a weapon. And the only time I really carry a weapon is when I go to Hilton Head, because I don't trust them people. No, I'm joking. We go out of town, I carry my pistol. Because in town, I can call Ken to come help me, and he'll, you know, Bobby, y'all come in a minute to rescue me. And, you know, now that Barry's here and Bill, you know, at 3 o'clock in the morning, I can call y'all and wake you up and say, hey, I need some help. But seriously, you got all these IDs. And then they tell you that it's safer to carry one of these with the chips on them and all of that. And it's just a matter of time. You know, you can scan this now. It's just a matter of time before they say, you know that chip that's on your card? How would you like to have that as your personal marker? And they'll put it in a band that you can wear, okay? And then they'll give you the option that you can actually go to your doctor and have it inserted. And they know my Social Security. They know my medical records. They got all that. They have everything they need to control me. And if I refuse, then, you know, they told those, 3 or was it 4 cadets at the Air Force, they didn't get the shots. And what'd they tell them? 4 years of education, they're not going to be able to graduate. To be commissioned as an officer, go out the window because they won't take the shots. And they said it was because of religious reasons they didn't want to take them, which tells me they're probably Jehovah's Witnesses, because Jehovah's Witnesses won't take anything like that. But my thing is, the control is here. Control is here. How far they go with it right now in our lifetime, I don't know.
It's still in fear in everybody.
It's still in fear. You know, they say we got the monkeypox now. I started doing this afternoon, and I wonder if I had it. But when I turned on my TV and they showed me pictures of Washington, I said, well, they got it. They're all apes up there anyway, you know, buffoons or whatever, baboons. All right, bringing all this kind of to a close, we don't know the answers to all this, but it's going to happen, you know. And the stuff is already here. It says, verse 16, had 10 horns. You saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. So here's the interesting. Evil turns against evil. Now, you know, I have dogs all my life, but the neighborhood I was raised up in, sometimes we'd have a pack of dogs come to the neighborhood, you know. And you ever heard the expression, the hurt dog